So in session 4 of our CDT program, in project delivery, we're going to talk about construction documents. This will be part 1 of 3. These 3 sessions together comprise a significant part of the exam. This is an AIA approved course. Quickly go over our learning objectives for the session. In the next 2 classes is a focus on contract documents and procurement documents. Keep in mind that we are only using AIA and EJCDC terms here. If you're doing federal work, city work, large institutional work, they may vary in the process and terminology, but basically the concept is the same. Of course, the terminology is what typically trips people up. So our session outline today is the elements that make up CDs, procurement, and contracting requirement forms. Good question about contract documents. Are shop drawing contract documents? We know from the general conditions that they're not. So what are contract documents? This particular figure illustrates the elements of what contract documents are. In this class, we refer to this as the Tower of Power. Construction documents, note, include both the procurement and the contract documents portion. You should have in your handouts a large printout of this particular slide, which would be helpful to refer to. Keep in mind, contract documents include both the written and the graphic documents, and they're prepared for communicating the project design to the constructors. We're going to provide you with a blank Power of Tower as a supplemental handout later. For those taking the test, it's a good way to test yourself as how well you understand the Tower of Power. Note the double plus sign, understand the major headings, definitely understand the various different components which we'll go through. Note that procurement documents are not contract documents unless they're specifically listed in the contract. The procurement documents are used for bidding and negotiating and purchasing. They encompass all of the documents in the figure, including the specs and the drawings, except for contract documents and modifications. Procurement requirements are the shaded portion, which include the solicitation for bidding, the instructions to bidders, outline procedures for bidding, including bid forms and other documents to be submitted by the bidders. These documents are listed under the title Procurement Requirements, which are the ones shaded in the Tower of Power as part of Division 00 and are delineated as such in the graphic. These items are usually dropped from contract documents because once the contract is signed, nobody really cares when the bid opening took place or that sort of thing. Keep in mind that procurement bidding documents are not contract documents unless they're specifically listed in the contract and often made part of the agreement itself. Contract documents are specifically listed in the contract. They should be listed in the agreement. The contract documents include both written and graphic elements and are specifically listed in the contract, or that they are issued as modifications to the contract after award of the contract, which the award being the signing of the agreement. This being the colored section of it, consisting of the contract forms and the agreements. Sometimes the bid forms, if they're referenced in an agreement, sometimes you'll have like a lengthy unit price or alternate requirements, and rather than having to retype them and put them in the agreement, often they'll just simply refer to them. They'll include the specifications and the drawings, and also all the contract modifications and the ASIs. Note that the procurement requirements and the addenda are not part of the contract documents, and neither are the resource documents at the bottom of the tower, which relate back to the additional information which we'll be discussing in a few more slides. So, the project manual, often mistakenly referred to as the spec book or the doorstop or the dust enhancement device, the project manual itself includes the following elements, okay? The procurement requirements, shaded here in blue, the contracting requirements again, and the specifications. So it's more than just the specifications, obviously. You're including the procurement and the contracting, procurement requirements and the contracting documents. They do not include addendum and includes elements in procurement and contract document. It's basically, it's the book that's going to go out to bid, if you think about it that way. Here's another way of illustrating it, and we'll send you out this in a little bit better image of the way the various elements of the construction documents. We've seen in the Tower of Power, it includes a group of family of documents called procurement requirements. And so now we're going to go over the specific elements and what they're used for. As previously stated, procurement requirements stipulate the rules and procedures for pricing the work, whether it's for flat-out bidding or negotiating or purchasing. Note that we use the term purchasing as referring to direct purchasing by the owner without the use of a AE or GC's involvement necessarily. This could be something, a piece of equipment that they purchase themselves. If they're going to handle the furniture all by themselves, including the design, that could be considered just a purchase. Usually deal with purchase orders. The nature of the bid is an offer by bidders for a specific scope of work at a set or specific price. And this is a response to a solicitation for bidding, and if it's accepted, then the lowest or sometimes best bid forms the basis of the contract. The key objective of bidding is to ensure that the pricing is reasonable and consistent with prevailing marketing conditions, often questioned as what the market will bear. Note in Canada, this is typically called a tender. And please circle this last phase in your handout, the last phrase in the handouts. The objective of bidding is to ensure that the cost of the project is reasonable and consistent with prevailing conditions within the industry. Now, the nature of a proposal, it's similar to the bid, but it's often part of a negotiation process, and it may or may not be incorporated into the contract. It may be requested in the form of a request for proposal, and may be requesting a pre-qualified trade contractor or subcontractor by the GC. Again, clarification of terms used by CSI, AIA, and the EJDC about bid versus proposals. You'll hear those terms intermixed, and again, if you're not working with specifically AIA or EJCDC, different contracts may use different terminologies for that. Construction documents. I'm going to go over the procurement requirements, solicitations, instructions, available information, and the procurement forms. The solicitation or invitation to bid is basically the key component of it is to attract qualified bidders and to allow subcontractors, bidders, and material suppliers to determine if they have a reason to submit a bid. Keep in mind that a contractor incurs a lot of cost to bid a project. So an invitation is basically to give them enough information to determine, do they really want to spend the time to acquire and review the documents. There are two means of soliciting for bids, and an invitation for bids usually means that only certain contractors will be invited. If it's going out to public bid, we refer to that as an advertisement for bid. Okay? And an advertisement for bid is a notice to the general public and is in the form of a legal notice on publicly funded projects, basically anything that's taxpayer funded. Note the difference. We'll talk about RFPs a little bit later as part of solicitations. Any solicitation for bid basically has the following elements and include all of these. Bid security and owner's right to reject bids is two important components to protect the owner. We'll talk about those in a little bit more detail, but keep in mind that the owner does not necessarily and is not obligated to take the lowest bid or for that matter, to take any bid. Now, instructions for procurement, or what used to be called instructions for bidders, include specific requirements to be included in the bid, i.e. what the bid form is, the addendum acknowledgement, what bid bond forms, what certifications, and other documents that might be required illustrating the bidder's financial stabilities or some sort of qualifications. These are some examples of what instructions for procurement may include. And here are some additional examples normally to be included. Keep in mind that all of these are critical instructions that must be followed by the bidders, especially on a publicly funded project in which you cannot allow for any irregularities in the bid. If these instructions are not followed, then the bidder may be deemed non-responsive and the bid disqualified. Keep in mind that, yes, it is complicated. You do need to have all these items in there. They're there to protect both the owner and the bidder. But you also need to make sure that it's simple enough as to not to disqualify a single one or even multiple bidders for misunderstanding what you're writing in your bidding or procurement requirements. Out of all the sections of the specifications, this is the one that you really need to spend the most amount of time on in order to make sure, because nothing's more embarrassing than to be there at bid opening and have all the bidders misread, or a good portion of them misread what your intention was. Available information to the bidders may include record drawings and are provided for reference and bidding assistance. They're not part of the construction documents. A geotechnical report might be an example of a reference document that's part of available information. You basically don't want it if the geotechnical report is done by an outside consultant that was hired separately by the owner. You basically don't want it in your contract document, and so that way you list it as available information, and in this that's basically stating that you're not taking responsibility for authorship of that document or any other document that you may be provided. Maybe the owner's provided you with some record drawings of the existing facility, and they didn't hire you to verify that that it's accurate, you don't want to take responsibility for those items. This is a detailed list of the documents that might be included. Again, it's a good idea to provide things such as record documents for bidders, especially if it's going to be remodeled. It's going to help mitigate claims for unforeseen or hidden conditions. And keep in mind, do not accidentally place information here that may be critical to include in the contract. Like a very specific phasing diagram that you agree to with the owner, rather than just a preliminary schedule. If you want a preliminary schedule is to give the bidders an idea of what the schedule is going to be. The contractor is going to end up providing a particular schedule. You may have in the contract documents themselves a due date, but how you get there may be just suggested. But if you have very specific requirements, you shouldn't be putting them here. You should be putting them in the contract documents. Procurement forms, again, included with the procurement requirements. These are the documents that need to be filled out completely by the bidders. The bid forms basically are to ensure that each bidder presents information on a standard format for ease of evaluation and comparison. Again, it's important to make it simple as possible. You do not want contractors having to, write between the lines or put something along the side or offer something that your owner will sit there and go, well, why did they put that there? What does that do for me? And you need a document by which you can compare apples to apples, all the bidders. This is the basic information that you're going to include in the bid form. Note the identification and the acknowledgement of the addenda of any addenda is on this form. It's important that they recognize, the bidders recognize that it's important to identify that they've looked at the addenda and the addenda have been included in their bids. Unit prices, alternates, and allowances are typically included as separate line items on bid forms. Sometimes they're an attachment associated with it. These are some of the additional forms or documents that may need to be submitted. Note that the proposed subcontractors may also be required document to be provided. This helps reduce bid shopping, which we'll discuss further in the CDT prep class session under procurement. This is where you'd also have MBE, WBE, DBE requirements and certs may be stipulated as part of the bid forms. And keep in mind that this is pretty extensive, and if you just have a very simple job, you probably won't need very many of these. Reps and certs. Basically, you're certifying that there's no collusion, and you certify that the business entity is licensed to perform the work. Those are two things that you basically want to make sure that the owner realizes is if they've accepted the low bidder, who they're negotiating with in order to, or who they're accepting the bid from, if it's a public entity, to sign the contract and perform the work. These are some of the various certifications that may be required to be provided by the bidders. Now we go into actual contracting documents. Contracting requirements. I'm sorry. As presented in the session on general requirements, there are many families of documents, again, the AGC, the AIA, EJC, EC, the DBIA, and the consensus documents. The key is to use the same documents throughout the entire set of contracts to ensure that there's coordination of all elements achieved. Each family of the construction contracts, again, will vary in terms and conditions. So don't mix an AGC consensus doc with an AIA doc. As far as, one being the general conditions and the other ones being the agreement. So the whole idea behind having these families is that you utilize one family and it makes things a lot easier. The contract forms are generally pre-printed and should be bound in the manual. Keep in mind that these documents are also copyrighted, so you simply cannot bind the original in there and make copies of it. Which can be rather expensive to do for bidding on a project, a small project. Keep in mind you can also, because of the fact that these are standard documents, that you can simply reference them. If you're working on any decent sized project, a contractor will understand what an A201 document is. So putting that reference in, saying that's what you're going to use as your general conditions, is also acceptable. But we will go over the science behind these forms in a later session. These are some of the forms that will be included within the contract requirements. The notice of award is a letter indicating the owner's intent to contract with the low bidder. Once contracted, the notice to proceed indicates that the contractor may start the work, and more importantly, it starts the clock for the construction time if there's agreed upon due date. Project forms and bond forms. Keep in mind the most common bond is a payment and performance bond. Basically, a payment and performance bond is a bond that the contractor obtains from a surety, from a separate company or third party, that guarantees that they're going to complete the work, and also guarantees that they're going to pay their subs. So if you ask for a performance and payment bond, keep in mind the bond company or the surety usually issues a bid bond for free to the bidders, or like next to nothing in cost. So if you're going to be asking for a performance and payment bond, there's no reason not to ask for a bid bond for the value, for the total value of the project. There are many other forms that are going to be used throughout the project delivery process. Here's a list of the common ones. Things like infection controls, very important in hospitals. Construction waste diversion may be stipulated where you have hazardous waste material being delivered to ensure compliance with EPA regulations. Recycled content of material is a common form used on sustainability projects. And again, MBE certifications are common on federal and state and even local government requirements. Some of the other forms you may find in this section of the project manual. Now, one of the unique things about construction contracts is that they're expected to change. They're expected to be modified. They're expected to be revised. It's not a take it or leave it scenario with the contract, unlike most contracts in which you expect both parties to completely fulfill their contract and they're not going to change it. In the construction world, we all know that I don't think I've ever heard of a project that hasn't had at least one minor change to it. So these are the forms that you use for contract modifications after award of the contract. And they're also provided within the project manual. Example, ASIs, construction change directives, change orders, substitution requests. It's a good idea to reference these things. That these are the forms that's going to be used. And keep in mind that each of the family of documents have the unique forms. For example, a field order is part of an EJC family of document, but you won't find it in the others. Some additional contract modifications forms you may see in the project manual also. When you're finishing up the project, you need to fill out your closeout forms. The warranty, the certificate of substantial completion that the architect may issue. Inclusion of these forms help with the overall management and administration of the project. Contractor will realizes, or the bidders realize, these are the forms you're going to be using. And if they're not, they may be referred to in the narrative section if they're not included, like I said before. So we've gone over in detail the A201 and the contractual responsibilities of the AE, the owner, and the GC, and the whole tri-party agreement. Keep in mind that CSI and AIA recommends that pre-printed general conditions be included to ensure that the bidders fully understand the contractual requirements that will be implemented. Or like I said, more common ones like the A201 can be simply referenced. This alleviates any misconceptions about the contractual requirements and facilitates the contract signing and award at a much faster pace. Again, here's our famous tri-party agreement in the relationship. And keep in mind the conditions of the contract form a bridge between the three parties and defines the rights, responsibilities, and relationships of these parties. As a reminder, the owner and the contractor are parties to the construction contract. The owner and the architect have their own separate contract. And if you're going to be using the family of documents, there's a good link between them. Because of the fact that there are standard general conditions, keep this in mind. If you know the A201, everybody knows what an A201 includes. If you're a decent sized contractor, you can simply reference it instead of include it. But you also need to make some changes to it. Okay. Some people say, well, you don't really need to use it because you can modify the A201 document electronically. If you do that, make sure you highlight all those edits so that the bidders realize that no, it's not exactly like the A201 that I bid on my previous project. It does have differences. Personally, I prefer to have separate supplemental conditions, a separate basically section or document in the contract documents. What that does is provides a very clear understanding that these are the revisions. It's one location. You know, somebody doesn't have to go sort through the entire A201 to find what the changes are. Some of the common elements that change are things like insurance requirements, who's providing the insurance requirements. But there are many, many other things. It could be who's doing the testing and inspections. Could be you can basically change the whole document if you want it out of supplemental conditions. But those are the typical ones. Now here we illustrate some of the types of revisions and clarifications that are used during the various stages of the project delivery process. Keep in mind that there's going to be changes, like we said, or clarifications. Note that addendum are used before the receipt of bids for public and private public projects, but they can also be a post-bid addendum for private. Used to say that, yeah, there's this, after the bids are done in a private project, the owner and the contractor go in a smoke-filled room and kind of hash out some particular changes. If you're not party to that, and you need to find out what those changes are. And the best way to do it is to include it in a post-bid addendum. That way everybody's familiar with what those revisions are. Now, substitution requests may be implemented before the receipt of bids, between the receipt of bids and the contract award, and after contract execution. So if you're going to have a substantial change to a substitution of, say, a material, it's good to make sure that that's utilized through a substitution request from the contractor, just to keep everything in order. If you're taking the exam, make sure you commit to memory when the various forms of clarifications or modifications are used and during which phases of the project. So this graphic illustrates some of the contractual differences between the AIA contract families and the EJC-DC contract families, and the various terms for various types of contract modifications for each of these contracts. So you see that the EJC-DC, the addendum, only goes up until bid and proposal opening. That's particularly important to note because EJC-DC documents are used often for civil work, which are more than likely publicly funded. The AIA documents, note, are often used for private projects. And so, again, like I said before, there can be changes up through the execution of the contract. Now, when you're stepping through and starting construction after execution of the contract, the various forms make changes. And there's various change order and field order terminologies. Okay, and to wrap up, reviewing the final component of construction documents, here's what we've covered in this section. Do we have any questions? Now it's time to type them up. If not, I thank you. We went through here pretty quick, got you out, still have time for lunch.